Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. I'm Cipher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Welcome back. As promised in our last video, I will be sharing more of my own actual opinions. And I don't plan to shy away from the subjects that are most likely to get the highest number of people to hate me over them, so let's jump right into it with abortion. Like most political subjects, abortion is a deep and complex issue that's been discussed a lot over the years, despite the fact that people on both sides tend to use rhetoric to simplify it and try and make you think that it is an easy one or the other choice, when really the issue is much, much more nuanced than that. But let's start with the sides. The religious right, who holds probably the strongest views on this, and it's not just the right, it's really just anyone who holds their religion dear. There are religious people on the left. Most of those people believe that abortion is taking an innocent life, that because that life has started growing, whether or not it has any conscious thoughts or feelings of its own, it is in fact a human life and thus should not be taken. The left, on the other hand, believes that an abortion is part of a woman's right to decide what happens to her body. They don't see it as affecting another living being. They see it as a medical procedure, essentially dealing with a problem that the woman has. But what about people in the middle? See, I was raised, strictly speaking, on the left, for the most part, with some centrist views involved, and my mother, while she had closer views to me growing up these days, would be very, very firmly on the left when it comes to the abortion issue, that it is no one but the woman's choice. However, my views have been much more complex on this since I was very young. See, I've never felt good about the idea of abortion, but I've always felt that facts should take precedence over feelings when it comes to anything becoming law. So, I've always described myself for decades now as morally against abortion, but politically pro-choice. See, I feel there are times when, not just feel, I think there are times I need to start being careful with using those two words. I think that there are times when abortion is necessary. Now, of course, there are the times when the life of the mother is at stake, when it's not necessarily a viable entity and it's safer to abort what is probably never going to be a baby than put the mother's life at risk. Those are cases in which it's easy for me to say that abortions are medically and legally necessary, even if you consider it to be morally wrong and taking a life. Consider the fact that in times when abortion has been illegal, people put in those situations will go outside of the law to get one, putting themselves and often those around them at greater risk, and very frequently subjecting themselves to horrifying conditions when the time for the medical procedure takes place. The more complex issue is things like victims of rape. That is a viable life, and it's not necessarily the potential baby, as the right would say, well, they would just say baby, but it's not necessarily the potential baby's fault that the father was that way. Now, American Horror Story Season 2, spoiler alert, goes into that subject in depth and suggests a nature over nurture reality. Well, not necessarily. In that series, and huge spoiler here, so you might have to tune this one out if you plan to watch it, the son of Bloodyface, the serial killer from the past, is the serial killer in the future. However, he was both the son of a rapist serial killer as well as put into a pretty bad position young in life, abandoned by his mother and put through, the system. So, I guess it's not fair to say that they put a nature over nurture approach. But I do see the fear, which is expressed very thoroughly in that season of that show, American Horror Story Season 2, that a baby of a rapist might have some of those tendencies. I can see a potential mother, not wanting to deal with the extra issues that would come from raising a child. Maybe that woman does want to have children, but wants to have, one with a partner with issues that she chooses. So that's where the issue becomes complex, and where I honestly have not been able to take a firm side as when specifically on the subject of rape victims. However, even if you're morally against abortion, especially as a form of contraception, I'm not sure that making it illegal is the way to stop it. See, for many years, in America at least, abortion, most places, was legal, but it wasn't socially tolerated on the right or the left, and it certainly wasn't celebrated. It wasn't seen as an everyday procedure. It was something that tended to be taken seriously by everyone involved. It wasn't an easy choice. When I was growing up, I didn't know anyone who'd had more than one abortion. I'd never heard of it. It wasn't like the girls now who have had 8, 9, 10, are celebrating their 15th abortion, and that's not an exaggeration because they see it as taking out the trash. This is where I feel a line definitely needs to be drawn socially, that we need to tell these people it's not okay and explain to them the reasons why this is a complex subject, and actually stop and talk about it with each other rather than just saying, oh, it's a woman's right, oh, abortion is murder. Which brings us to those two. Let's start with abortion is murder. Abortion is not murder. Murder is taking another person's life illegally. It has to be against the law for it to be murder. So no matter how much you want to argue that it is killing a baby or killing a child or killing a human, argue all those things. Calling abortion murder is, well, it's doing what the right often accuses the left of these days. It's an attempt at the destruction of language. What you're doing is you're radicalizing the way you speak about these things beyond the actual defined truth of the words that you use in order to try and, make things simple for the people listening to you. Make it an either-or choice so that they have to pick a side rather than talking about the nuances of the conversation like we did in decades past. Now, I've already talked a little bit on it's a woman's body, it's her choice. Again, it was her choice, as many Republicans or those on the right will tell you, to get herself into that situation in most cases. And it's a complex subject when it comes to the case of rape. That's actually where I might be okay with, say, the required counseling before an abortion is in cases like that. Simply because I know if I were to be raped, it would be hard for me to be in an emotional state to make any rational decisions about my future until I had come to terms with that event. That being said, I certainly wouldn't want it to be something where, the psychologist could say, oh no, she's not psychologically ready to have an abortion, and then just put it off till it was too late. Speaking of too late, this brings us to late-term abortions, which have become more and more common in the last decade, and the laws that are taking things, in my opinion, too far both ways. I saw a law suggested recently, I think it was Georgia, that suggested abortions only be legal until there was a heartbeat. This is a very, very clear and understandable emotional place to draw the line. However, it's at times only 6 weeks into the pregnancy, which can actually be before a woman has noticeably missed her period, making it impossible for that decision to be made. Now, I do see that since there are tests that work within that time frame, even if you don't suspect you're pregnant, that if you haven't taken precautions and have had unsafe sex, maybe just test yourself if you live in a state where one of those is legal. But what about when a condom fails and you don't know? Even taking protection isn't always enough. And yes, it can be argued that then it's simply your personal responsibility to deal with your actions, but it's simply not always that easy. I mean, there's then the case of that we have the state basically paying people to have children, right? So if you have a child, especially if you're a single mother, you end up basically having the government pay for most of your needs if you fill out the right paperwork, your food, your diapers, etc. This is great in that it ensures that these children who, it wasn't their fault that they were born into abject poverty, don't have to live on the streets for the most part. However, it also provides an incentive to be a single mother, which isn't always the best choice. And it's hard to get into this in a 15-minute video to cover everything that I want to, but it definitely makes it difficult on a moral level. When you don't want children to be raised in poverty, you don't want babies born on the streets in a society where we can pay for them not to be, but you also don't want abortions and don't want the social services. Basically, both sides have different views which seem to kind of conflict on the issue, and as someone in the middle, I have views that kind of fall on both sides, most of which are taken from logic, but some of which are taken more from my morals. And I think it's simply something that needs to be openly discussed without the rhetoric. I think the times that actual discussions can be had, a lot of people can find a middle ground that they're okay with. A lot of times keeping abortions illegal, but not socially celebrating them. And that it's really just the outliers on this issue who cause the problem, especially on the left. It's the outliers who celebrate the abortions who cause the problem. On the right, on this issue, I think most of the right is the problem, because I've heard a lot of people on the right call abortion murder, and it simply isn't. That is language-destroying rhetoric. It's what the left is doing with words like racism and sex, and it needs to stop on both sides. But I'll cover destruction of language more in several more videos, I'm sure. Anyway, it got a bit rambly, and I got a few of my views out there, not everything that I wanted to, but I think this is a good way to start a discussion. So let's talk about more in the comments below. What do you think about abortion? When is abortion okay, and when is putting legal restrictions on abortion okay, if ever? For both. Anyway, please like and subscribe, as I know you humans need to be reminded to do so. And more importantly, give me some conversation down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I'm your host, Cipher. Thanks for watching the Devil's Advocate Debate Club.